Good afternoon, everybody. This is Travis Escobar, founder and board president of Millennial Rhode Island, and want to thank you for joining us for our first Millennials Making Moves interview series, collaboration by Millennial Rhode Island and Trailblaze PVD. You could be streaming anything online right now, but you're watching over here, so I appreciate that. And want to talk a little bit about Millennial Rhode Island in our interview series. So Millennial Rhode Island is a generational networking group working to inspire more young people to live and work and grow in the state. And with this series, we're looking to spotlight members of our generation moving the state forward, but also members of other generations who are having an impact on millennials and Rhode Island in general. This afternoon, we'll be talking to millennials who are running for office. This panel, this session is not meant to serve as an endorsement for any particular candidate because we're a 501c3, but we're looking to inform and share the journey of individuals who are of our generation who are taking that step and running for office are already an elected position. Every election is important, but 2020, for a lack of a better term, just feels much different. In the first quarter of 2020, we've seen a global pandemic, another economic crisis, and the death of George Floyd set off a series of protests across the nation with millions of people asking to dismantle systemic racism and for everyone in our country to finally acknowledge that, yes, Black Lives Matter. 2020 gives younger generations, both millennials and Gen Z, the opportunity to vote for the future we want for our country to have, but many of us millennials are now growing up and being able to vote at larger rates and also run for office to help change policy. We're a growing generation. We're the largest generation in this country, one of the more diverse generations, and this election will have an opportunity to really have a significant voice, as we've seen with older generations, baby boomers, people who are age 56 and older. They're expected to account for fewer than 4 in 10 eligible voters in 2020, a significant drop from even 2000 when eligible voters were 68%. So for young generations and for younger generation, either in Rhode Island or across the country, this is a really important election for us to get engaged, and I'm really excited for today's discussion. We'll move forward. I'll introduce Chris Parisi, who's the president of Trailblaze PVD, who will explain the format of today.
Yeah, thank you, Travis. That was very well said. I'm really excited to start our first of the new series called Millennials Making Moves. This is co-produced with Millennial RI. I'm on the board for that, as well as Trailblaze PVD marketing agency here in Rhode Island. So with this live format, which is shared on Millennial RI's Facebook, Twitter, and other social media channels, we want to hear directly from our panelists, our millennials that are making moves, that are running for office, but we also want to hear from you, the audience. So with this, you have a chance to ask any questions that you would like to hear from the panelists, whether it's a specific candidate or a question that all of them can answer. All you have to do is put your question in the comment section with whatever social media channel that you're watching it on. We'll see the comment. And our producer in the background, the Wizard of Oz, Ben, he will share it if we can with time permitting, so that this is an interactive live feed opposed to just Travis and I asking a few questions. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it back to Travis and we can introduce our three panelists.
Thank you, Chris. And I'm really excited to introduce our panelists. We have Karen Alzate, who is currently a representative representing the Great District 60 in Pawtucket. We also have Dylan Conley, who is a candidate for Congress, District 2. And we have Tatiana Baena, who is a candidate for Central Falls City Council at large. Thank you all for being here today and agreeing to be part of this panel. So for the beginning question, I'm going to have y'all talk about a little about yourself, sort of like in a small Twitter format, just a small little bio about yourself, and share with people watching at home what made you want to run for office. So Karen, Representative Alzate, I'll start with you.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for that. This is wonderful. Thanks for having me on here. So one of the things that made me really want to run was, I was born and raised here in Connecticut, and I think we're kind of seeing a lot of the momentum as to, Pawtucket politics is not necessarily very representative of its people. And I initially didn't necessarily want to run. I really wanted to be somebody behind the scenes. So I wanted to support a candidate running. I guess nobody really wanted to run. We had a representative in our seat who just was, kind of kept the same landscape of Pawtucket and really wasn't representative of our city. And so I decided that I was gonna run, and it was really like, let's just see what happens. And in a weird way, I got lucky, and he decided that he wanted to retire. And I had a lot of support from the city. I had a lot of support from friends, and I ran unopposed my first year, which was really awesome. But one of the things I didn't realize how much I love the city until I was actually already in office. And so that question of like, why did you run? I think is still building now. Like I'm still coming up with the reasons as to why I ran versus like an old idea. So I love the city. I love that I grew up here. I know it really well. And I'm very proud to be in this seat. So yeah.
Thank you, Representative Alzate, for that. We'll go with you, Tatiana.
Still can't get used to that little mute button there. Thank you. Thank you for having me today. And thank you to Travis and Chris. And I'm running for office I'm running for city council at large in Central Falls so that I can continue to give back to my community. I emigrated from Columbia to Central Falls at the age of 8. I grew up in the city. I went to all of the public schools. So I went to Robertson, now Raices Dual Language Academy. I went to Calcutt Middle School. I went to Central Falls High School. And then I had the opportunity to go to URI. One of my first jobs after college was having the opportunity to work in the office of Congressman David Cicilline in his district office in Pawtucket. And at that point, I really got the opportunity to see how government really works and how we can make it work to assist our communities, the communities that really, really need it. And then also other experiences such as New Leaders Council and the Latina Leadership Institute exposed me to more resources and different ways to get involved in my community. So for the past few years, I've really enjoyed becoming more involved. I volunteer my time translating. I serve on different boards, such as the planning board here in the city, which oversees all of the planning and development in the city. So, having a lot to do with the new train station coming in. I also started or was able to start an annual futsal tournament and league that raises funds to provide scholarships to Central Falls student athletes, and also brings the community together, highlighting all of the diverse cultures that we have here in the city. So really, I feel like it's time to take another step. I'm running for office so that I can do even more for the people of Central Falls. I grew up in this community. I know the needs and concerns of our residents, and I am prepared to advocate for them at City Hall.
All right. I was compelled to run for office. I think everyone kind of knows the experience of when the riots hit Providence and sort of how the pandemic had taken hold of us. I think culturally, the rise of systemic racism in that moment, and there were rumors that the riots were headed to my neighborhood, and I've got a 17-month-old son with my wife Jenica, and his bedroom window is closer to the street than ours, so I was kind of just sleeping in the front room because I couldn't think of anything else to do to make sure that everything was going to be safe that night. And you feel ridiculous when you're doing that, that the only thing you can do in that moment is to like sleep in a front room, and you don't sleep. You kind of lie awake, and you're trying to figure out how all this happens. And for us to get to where we are, there are a number of systems that need to have failed us. The way that we run our country isn't designed to help us from the bottom up. It's designed to take care of those at the top, and the rest of us are left to squabble with each other for the scraps. And I was kind of coming from a position of anger when I originally decided to run for office. And then I went to the Gen Z We Want to Live protest in Providence, and seeing the momentum that people had, seeing how in the midst of a pandemic, we had the largest protest march in Rhode Island history, demanding equal rights for everyone, demanding recognition that Black Lives Matter. My mind kind of pivoted. I went from thinking that I needed to run from a place of anger about how broken everything is to a very, very hopeful place of we have a special moment in time in this election where we can do great things. And I really want to be a part of that.
This next question, I'm actually going to start with you, Dylan. So you're running for Congress. This is a sort of big undertaking. What is that process is looking like for you? You know, you're just beginning off, but for people who are thinking about, hey, how do I get to DC? Lay out the process for us.
So at first the process is just getting your bank account set up through the FEC, which is a serious headache, because anytime you walk into a bank and you say, hi, I need to report to the FEC, all the blood drains from their face and they're terrified. And so that's a lot of work to get your bank account up and running. Declaration of candidacy is the same as every office. You need to collect signatures just the same as any office. You need to collect more signatures. Collecting signatures in a pandemic, I know that Karen and Tatiana can attest to this, is not the most fun thing in the whole world. So those two things are pretty much the same as any race. The distinction is the scale at which you have to do everything. So we've got like a 45-person team that we have working virtually on different aspects of the campaign. We're really reaching out to a ton of volunteers because we're not an old campaign. We haven't raised a ton of money yet. And if you want to donate, so it's really the scale of everything. Normally, when you think about a mailer, you're thinking about a mailer to a couple thousand households. When you're running for Congress, it's tens of thousands of households. When you're thinking about doing a social media ad, it's not to 1 or 2 zip codes, it's for dozens. So all of your costs multiply, all of, the amount of people that you represent multiply. And then the interesting thing, and it's kind of a positive and negative about these campaigns, is Representative Langevin, my opponent, has a full staff. And so you're kind of running against a full staff, and their jobs are on the line. And that's something that's a reality. You're pushing back against a series of people's livelihoods. So it's very important that you do that for the democratic process, but I think it's also important to be sensitive to that reality.
Thank you, Dylan. Representative Alzate, so, you ran, you won, you're gearing up to run for re-election again. What's the process look like for someone looking to join the General Assembly?
Yeah, so it's been interesting. I say that I really had like a 1.5 year term because we've been out of office. We've been out of the state house since March, really, only with like a few of us going back for the supplemental and going back to committees. So this year, I actually, my predecessor decided that he was going to run for the seat again, and he was going to run as an independent. And so that kind of shook me up, and I think I needed that. I think it's really easy to think that just because you're not hearing a lot of criticism about the work that you're doing okay. And so when he filed, I kind of woke up and I was like, oh, like, okay. This, just because I had 1 full year and then I had 3 months, doesn't mean that, my job is over, right? Just because we're in a pandemic, this election still doesn't go away. And so I had to be reminded of my passion for the city. And so luckily I got tons of support from my constituents. Getting signatures was really hard, and I think that out of the little team that I had, with all the other Latinos or minorities running in the city, people were early just because I wanted to go out and I wanted to get signatures, and I really couldn't get over, like, how can we get creative so that we're not hurting each other and that we're keeping the social distancing. And so that was really hard. It was I think that we like to think that incumbents have it easy, but for me it doesn't feel easy. It doesn't feel like I have this, what we call, like, have this in the bag. To my look, my was not able to get signatures, and so he dropped out of the race. And so I'm happy that I'm going to be coming in for a second term. However, it's still not easy. I mean, just like Dylan said, like, we still have to do mailers, and mailers cost a lot of money. So, I give Dylan, props for wanting to do a congressional race, because it is very expensive. And so please feel free to donate, shameless plug. But it's not, I have some institutional knowledge now. I know what to expect now that this is my second term. But I still think that I don't know what to expect coming in January. And not because of a pandemic, but just because, I think it's okay to not be comfortable in the seats that you're in, and that we should always expect change. So yes, I have a few more friends now, and I have a few more contacts, but I still have to do the work. The work is still going to be there, and that's the thing that excites me the most, is really getting down and putting in some work.
Thank you, Representative, for that. Tatiana, we'll end with you on that question. What's the process been like for you running for city council?
Sure. So my process has actually been a little bit different, I would say, because I have been thinking about running for office for a really long time, a few years actually, and I don't know what kept holding me back, to be honest. The more that I kept like seeing elected officials or people representing us or people making decisions, and I'm like, why didn't I go for it? Or like, why is that person there? Or like, you could be doing better, And so like, finally I made that step, but before I like decided to fully take it on, to fully take the candidacy on, I made sure to have a lot of conversations. So, I talked to my job, like my former boss, my current job. I talked to, city leaders. I talked to family, friends, neighbors, just random people on the street, so I made sure to have a lot of different conversations with different organizations too, people that I've worked with in the past as well. And I also ended up convening like a small group of friends or people who, believed in what I was doing. And so we were able to come up with like different plans or platforms and sort of solidify what my run was going to be a little bit more. And then I took a look at the city charter. I know I'm going step by step, but literally like I didn't know anything about the city charter before I started running for office, right? And so I just want to make sure I put that out there. Like I checked that thing. I found out how the elections are, how many people are needed for a primary or not. All that type of stuff. So I made sure to do that as well. I checked with ethics, making sure that my job, at first I was working in Congressman Cicilline's office, like I mentioned. So I wanted to make sure that my job there wasn't going to affect my run. My job at the school district now, not affecting my run. So I made sure to check that. And then I just announced, right? Like there was a buzz around like November, December of 2019, where there were two candidates announcing their run for Central Falls City Council. And so I felt compelled to make my announcement because I had already made my decision. So I did, and we had a couple of fundraising events, thankfully, before the pandemic, because raising funds during the pandemic was not easy, nor did I want to ask people for money because it's kind of weird. Everyone's struggling, unemployment, housing, like all of these things are happening. And then here I am asking for money. And so, I made sure that I was very like conscious of all of that. I also ended up, finding out that I could only declare in June. So even though I had made the announcement, I wasn't really an official candidate until that period of time in June, where you go and you actually put in your name, you fill out the paper. And then I realized that I had to get 200 signatures. So for city council in Central Falls, in a ward, there's 5 of them. You just need 50 signatures. That's it. If you're running for state rep, you also need 50 signatures. If you're running for state senate, you need 100 signatures. But if you're running for city council at large, you need 200. And so that was news to me, and it was challenging. But I know the city. Like, I had already talked to so many people before the signature thing started, that I'm like, hey, can I count on you? I created a Google form. I found out who wanted to sign for me or collect signatures or help me collect signatures. And then I literally just put on a backpack and I walked the streets. I know it's not the safest thing, but I had hand sanitizer on hand. I had different papers. So if people didn't want to touch the same paper that someone else had touched already, then I provided them a brand new paper. Even though there was an effort to make this easy by doing it online, the process was that, you needed to first have access to a scanner or your phone or whatever to scan these things in, then email them to people. So assuming that people have email addresses, then they needed to print it out, sign it, and scan it back to you. So that really isn't feasible for people in Central Falls. We've already learned how much the inequities, affect our city through distance learning. Through the pandemic, we found out how many people didn't have access to computers, how many people didn't have access to internet. And so that wasn't really a viable option for me. I thought about going into the high rises as well. I didn't, only because I felt like those were the most immunocompromised people, and I didn't want to do that. But I did walk around, if people were outside, I make sure to stop in or stop them, or, just introduce myself. So that was kind of the process for me. After the 200 signatures, I'm now, knowing that I have 4 opponents, I'm now committed to my campaign and figuring out what my next steps are. But that's been the process for me so far.
Yeah, thank you. And what's great about this series is that we are kind of peeling back the onion layers of what it is like to run for office, because as our generation of millennials, as well as Gen Z, we want to empower everyone to be able to run for office and kind of break down those complexities. So sharing these stories at the city level, state level, and federal level is really helpful, and we appreciate that. And one common thread among all 3 of you is that you have a passion for your city, for your state, for your family, for your community members. And one of my passions, as most of you probably know, is small businesses, especially here in Rhode Island, and something that I've been advocating for a lot lately. So my question to the 3 of you, and we'll start with Representative Alzate and end with you, Dylan, is that small businesses are obviously critical to Rhode Island's long-term economic health. What policies would you put in place, or just choose one, main policy at your level? What policy would you put in place to positively impact the small businesses in your community? And we'll start with you, Ripia.
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I think this is something that we've seen because of this pandemic. Something I ran on last, for my first term, was trying to help to support small businesses. One thing that has been super highlighted with Pawtucket and Central Falls is the businesses that are owned by our undocumented residents. One of the things that I have been paying close attention to is the lack of funding that our small businesses have had access to. So we keep hearing that big, corporations have been the ones that were able to apply and get huge amounts of, PPP or small business loans or things like that. So one thing that I really want to, I don't necessarily think that it's a policy. However, I want, for lack of a better term, I think it's something that I want to like thrown at, right? I want to make sure that we are able to really concentrate financially now with this pandemic, is how can we as a state support our small businesses during something like this, and make it longer, keep it going, as well as how can we 100% make sure that we are able to help and save the businesses that are owned by our undocumented families. And I say families because these are places that we all frequently go to. They probably have the best food, especially in Pawtucket. We have delicious food here. And I'm sure that Tatiana could also vouch for Central Falls. So for me, one of the biggest things is I really want to work on trying to get more funding for our small businesses, and really with a huge concentration on trying to save our undocumented business owners, because they, due to their legal status, they have not been able to get any access to any types of loans. So that's something that is I think about hugely. Myself and the senator here in Pawtucket, we talk often. So I know that that's something that we definitely want to tackle.
That's a great point. And Tatiana, and your as a city councilwoman, what would policy that you would put in place to help your local small businesses?
So kind of going off what Wasate was saying, part of the reason why our small businesses didn't have access to some of these programs is also lack of access, right? Like something that I would do is work with city officials, the Small Business Administration, the Small Business Development Center, all of the commerces, including the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, to make sure that all stakeholders, residents, city officials themselves, people working in the city, are aware of all of the programs that are available so that we can push it to our people. So that's one thing. I worked as part of I have been working as part of the COVID response team for the city, and I've been speaking to the residents directly, helping them with family support. And so some of them are business owners, and some of the biggest things that I heard from the ones that are business owners are that they didn't know about something, that they didn't get it, that they didn't know where to look, that they didn't, get a letter. Sorry about my dogs. And so yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there that sometimes because of language or because of access to something they might not see. So that's something that I would definitely work on. Additionally, small businesses in the city actually had this situation happen a couple of weeks ago, where someone reached out to me and said, hey, if I want to run a business of this nature, like, what do I need to do? So I started going on and researching myself and trying to figure out what they needed to do in order to help them. And it wasn't really that streamlined. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there were directions as to what to do, but like for someone who, sometimes things just need to be in like plain English, like very simple, because some people just don't know, right? And like some of the stuff is in English. Okay, it's translating to Spanish. A lot of our business owners now, or a lot of our residents now, speak Creole, Cape Verdean Creole, and Portuguese. And so like, how are we empowering them also to start their own business or to go onto this website and figure it out? And so with the resident that had asked me about a business, we're looking to like find a comprehensive list of available spaces in the city that didn't exist, right? And so it's kind of like, shouldn't this be a thing? And so I've been currently working with the planning department to ensure that we have a comprehensive list of vacant, spaces in the city where small businesses could potentially come and settle in. And then I would also just, work with the same stakeholders that I mentioned earlier to find ways to incentivize our residents to become small business owners.
Those are great ideas, and I think your dog was actually barking in agreement with you, if I'm correct. Dylan, what about you on the federal level?
Sure. So the problem with the way the federal government generally approaches these bailouts is they do these top-down, large-scale programs. And small businesses are dispersed across the entire country. I mean, they're small business is usually a term used for like 500 and fewer employees. But what about, your micro, nano, mom and pop size businesses, all these sorts of things. And I think we just need to roll it back a little bit and do some simple economics. Every small business has a fight against two things: increasing revenue and limiting how much their costs are. So ways that the federal government can limit costs is support receivership programs. It's basically bankruptcy where you don't lose control of your business so that you can take advantage of today's lower interest rates and extend your debt out further. That changes your monthly payments there. If you do Medicare for all in such a way that it decouples the cost of healthcare from employment, it's a huge boon for small businesses because they no longer have to cover healthcare costs for their employees. That decreases labor. Instead of having an incentive for unemployment, you shift that incentive to work share. Work share is a great program where you go from working 5 days a week to 3 or 4 days a week. Unemployment covers the rest. If you take that bonus that people have been receiving from unemployment and you split it between the employer and the employee, it subsidizes the cost to rehire. Employees are making at least full-time compensation for less than full-time work. That's important because it will create more net jobs. There's a loss in labor demand, so we need to make sure we're doing that. All of those things are important for small businesses because each of these phases, the key thing you need is you need to have more cash in the economy. Average American families need more money to spend. So you boost earned income tax credit for the duration of the pandemic. You do regular monthly stimulus. You do things with the child tax credit, and you basically tweak on every single corner you can so that the average family has more cash on hand. When the average family has more cash on hand, they spend it locally. If you give a ton of cash to a billionaire, a chunk of that's going to end up in the Cayman Islands, a chunk of that's going to end up in Switzerland, and it's not helpful. So these really big programs the federal government likes don't work for small businesses. Average families need money. That gets money to small businesses. There's your revenue side. And then you need to focus on decreasing their monthly cost side. I think the two best ways to do that are through Medicare costs and through extending debt payments.
Thank you very much. That was great. And now we're at the halfway point through the program, and we're gonna shift gears and pick up an audience question here. So we have this from Shayna. What, if anything, could encourage more millennials to run in the future? This is a great question since this is part of the mission of our program right here. So we'll start with the elected official, and then we'll go to Dylan, and then end it with Tatiana.
So I've been thinking about this question since Shayna put it up, and I get this question a lot as to why I ran and all that. Honestly, the short answer is do it. I know there's no huge like big philosophical answer. The only way that we are going to be able to change the future, we're tired. Millennials, we're tired. We've been battling student loan debt forever. How many of us want to buy a home but we can't afford it? We're tired. So the only way that we are going to be able to make some positive change is to just run. Literally just do it. And when people see your passion for the reason that you're running, people will get behind you. If people really believe you because you're being honest, people will donate. People will come out and volunteer. People will help you. You will never be this alone. If you want to run, people will come out and they will help you. It's literally a movement every time some millennial decides to run. So the only way that I will never tell people never to run. I will give you my thoughts on it, and my thoughts are to just do it.
I love that. Dylan, what do you think we can do to encourage more millennials? I don't know if you can follow up after that because that was great, but what do you think we can do to encourage more millennials to run for office?
I think on a process side, we need to stop it from being an old boys club designed to keep incumbents in office, with all due respect to the incumbents on the call. But seriously, there's a lot of different pieces to the system that are designed to maintain the people that are there. And I think we need more millennials to get into office and need to basically sacrifice their personal interests for the betterment of the democracy as a whole. They need to have democracy dollars, which are basically allow people to give donations through federal government money to local candidates, state candidates. And we need to expand access to the ballot by making the rules simpler, by making the party nomination process simpler, by doing things like jungle primaries, ranked choice voting. There's a whole suite of things that we could really put in place, which would make participation in government something that everyone feels open to, as opposed to something that you need to know a guy in order to start doing. And I'm really committed to doing that.
Great, thank you. And Tatiana, to close it up, of what we can do to encourage more millennials to run for office, and then we'll transition to Travis.
So I agree with both Dylan and Representative Alzate. You know, if you have a passion for making something better, for making your community better, if you are someone who is vocal about the inequities or the challenges that your community faces, you know, especially now, and I think in our generation, there's like this whole woke culture, right? And like, we're so woke, but we ain't doing about it, right? And so it's kind of like, okay, you know everything that's happening, you know all of the challenges, you know that you're in debt, you know that all of these things. So what are you doing to change it? Very, very simple. What are you doing to change it? And so, you know, I noticed that there was a gap, you know, what was happening in Central Falls. And so I figured, who better else than me? I'm from the community, you know, I've been working here, I've been doing the work. And so if you're someone like that, that has been doing the work, that's been behind the scenes, that don't be afraid to come in front of, I was not a person who would say that it's like, I'm like the face of anything. That's not really who I ever meant to want to be. To be honest, I'm more of like a behind the scenes, like campaign manager type person. But at one point it's like, okay, if you're not going to do it, then who is? And so, you know, especially for women, they say that they have to ask us, like, I don't know how many times before we actually decide to run for office, but it's definitely more than 10 or something like that. And it's true. It is so true. Oh yeah, 7, there you go. It's so true. It's like, you know, how many times didn't probably someone ask Karen? How many times didn't someone ask me? And I didn't feel ready for whatever reason. But again, as I said earlier, it's like you start seeing all of the things and all of what people say and where they stand and how they approach decisions. And you're like, wait a minute, you know? So anyway, that's my advice to you.
Thank you, Tatiana. And I think about just civic engagement being taught in K through 12 as one of the more important policy areas that we should advocate as a generation to just spur community engagement, civic education. We do advocacy presentations at United Way, and one of the things I'll ask is, do you know who your state rep is? Do you know who your state senator is? And they get confused. They'll be like, you mean Cicilline, me Langevin? I'm talking about, Representative Alzate. I'm talking about other reps in the General Assembly, right? So I think that's really important. But also for our generation, there are people that are talented, but they might feel uncomfortable getting into politics. And I think you can help bridge the gap by making sure we get more young people appointed to boards and commissions, but also working within government and sort of getting that talent in. And Tatiana, you've worked in government. You've worked with Congressman Cicilline. You've also done a lot of great work in local boards in Central Falls. And please share some of the things you've learned in those roles that you've took on and that you're taking on with this campaign and sort of hopefully for your next chapter as a city councilwoman.
Sure. So for me, like I said, well, when I started working in Congressman Cicilline's office, I was fresh out of college. I really, I never really considered politics to be my career or to be part of my life in the way it has been. But once you get educated and you start learning, like I said, how things work, how to make systems work for you, because technically you are the boss. You are electing these people into office. You should have a say in what's happening. And so something I've learned in all of the boards that I've served, but also in Congressman Cicilline's office, is listen to the people. Like people they care, they want to be involved. They just need the opportunity to actually speak their mind, in a way that they're comfortable to. I would also say, not, don't pretend to know everything. No one does. It's not true. And so, I definitely hope to continue to learn. I've learned a lot in the last 5 years, and I want to continue to listen and continue to learn from our community so I am able to put forth the best policies for them. And it's really all about uplifting the voice of the community. That's what I've learned. It's all about, I'm not the person that, should have the answers. I'm not the person who should make all of the decisions. It should be a collaborative process. Something else is engage in healthy dialogue, and just never forget that all of the work that you're doing is for the people, and stay true to yourself. That's what I've learned.
Thank you, Tatiana. We'll now go to Karen with this question. Representative Alzate should say, as you run for re-election, what are some of the insights you've learned over the last 2 years as an elected official?
Yeah, so with being said, I think I have to agree with everything that Tatiana said, right? But one of the things that I think is a misconception is that people don't want to be bothered at the door. And one of my favorite things, and one of the things that unfortunately was really hard this time around with getting the signatures, was your constituents really do want to see you at the door. And they actually are paying attention. And I had ended up getting a lot of emails last year on legislation that, and a lot of them were fairly young, and they were people that I didn't necessarily know personally from the community, but they would leave like their address and like tell me that they were however old, like in their 30s or 40s. And so one thing that I learned was, I think that we have this idea that our politics is the only people that are paying attention are older people. But I think, with everything going on and, our current, presidential administration, I think younger people are paying attention. So that's something that I really learned, that I take that with me, because I think that we try to kind of be innovative, right? We're saying only older people vote and only older people pay attention to politics, but that's definitely turning. Another thing that I learned was the small things matter, and how much none of us know how our own government works, right? And so coming in, you kind of have this idea, and with the lack of civic engagement that we get from our schools and our books and however you call it, or however you learned it, you start to realize like what people are telling you is not what's happening inside. And it's not there's this corrupt idea, but just the way that we pass legislation, just the way that the system is set up, nobody knows how it works. And you're even people who think that they know exactly how the system works. I think that it's more so you're learning, it's literally learning on the job. And I think that to me is one of the best things about being elected, is that I'm so happy that I don't know how the system works and that I'm learning how it works, because it's exciting just to know that you're doing something better, that you're literally like being really innovative. And I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing for our government, but it definitely has kept me on my toes, at least the whole first year. Like I said, I only had 3 months, and in 3 months at the State House, a lot of stuff is happening. It's not enough time to really show the things that you're really passionate about. But for me, one of the biggest things was, I wish that I knew how government worked. I wish that I really was more engaged civically as I was younger. I now have the privilege of being able to bring in my little cousins and my neighbors who are young and they're really interested. And so that's a privilege all on its own. And it's something that I really want to bring into the State House, hopefully if I continue to be elected. But it's so different. It's so different, and every day is different. So that's always been really awesome.
Yeah, and then sharing these stories, to others is really helpful too, to get the behind the scenes understanding, to understand what it is like to have, or how your government does work, for you. So thank you for sharing that. And then for our next question, we're going to bring up Dylan Conley. Conley, we saw in your campaign talking about a new wave. What does this mean to you, and how does that translate to true change in the country?
Sure. So one of the interesting things about this election is it looks as though the Democrats are poised to take over the House, the Senate, and the presidency. So you generally call that a blue wave. But what I talk about is a new wave, because I think there's a revolution happening within the Democratic Party itself. There's a pivot from old party stalwarts to new ways of thinking about things. I think this was at first led by Senator Sanders and his presidential candidacy. Subsequently, I think AOC has done a phenomenal job of taking up that baton and being a leader for a new voice within the Democratic Party. And I think you're seeing Democrats primary other Democrats, because the ideas about what it means to be a Democrat have changed. We're pivoting from sort of Clinton era corporate Democrats, and we're becoming much more old school classic Democrats, which is just like working class people. And that's something that I really care about and that I really want to be a part of.
Thank you. And now we're going to have all the candidates back up, all panelists back up on the screen here. So just one more reminder to our audience, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. The last 10 minutes or so here, we're going to be audience questions. So if you have anything, please put them there, and our producer, Ben, will try to pop them up there. And a special shout out, thank you again, Ben. But before we go to the audience questions, I'm going to pass it over to Travis to ask one of the questions that we originally had scheduled about lessons.
Yeah, so what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned from running? I'm going to start with Tatiana, because Tatiana, I remember going to your campaign kickoff. I remember talking to you about, hey, I'm going to run for sort of office. And, the world seems like a whole decade ago before when you announced that, sort of you're running. So I'll start with you, Tatiana. What's sort of the biggest lesson you've learned running for office?
One of the biggest lessons I've learned, I would say two things. One, be resourceful. Be resourceful in terms of, and Dylan talked about fundraising equity or dollars, having like people that could fundraise for you and things like that. So using your own actual, financial resources, like finding those connections. Literally, you have to be as resourceful as possible, because nothing's going to come easy. Trying to get those 200 signatures, trying to raise money, trying to host events, trying to get your name and your face out there, because really, if people don't know your name and your face, they're not going to vote for you, right? No matter, you could be talking about the best policies, but if they don't know you, they're not going to vote for you. And so that's one thing about being resourceful. And then empowering like the people around you, because really, again, like this is their race. Like I know I'm the face, but it's about the community. And so involve your community. I just can't stress that enough. A lot of people, and I said this, kind of touched on it earlier, they come in and they try to reinvent wheels. They try to create things out of nothing, when there are so many community organizations or community people already doing this work. Why aren't we talking to them? Let's empower them. That's something I've learned, in my quest to city council, like, and talking to people. A lot of their concerns are, well, what are you going to come in and do? Or like, are you going to talk to me about this or not? Because the other person didn't, and it's kind of like, okay, all they want is to voice their concern. So that's really like, those are the main two things I've learned that I think I like knew, but I didn't really know, right? Until I started hearing it so much from people. That's really the recurring theme that I'm hearing from people when I'm talking to them. So I would say that's one of the biggest lessons.
And you say involve the community. We have a question here from Kristen. Ben, if you could pull it up in terms of the youth, because the youth is very important. So the question here from Kristen Langworthy is, what would you say to encourage youth to be voters? Representative Alzate, we'll start with you. What would you say to encourage youth to be voters?
That's a really loaded question, I think. But I think it goes back to we need to educate our youth to be civically engaged. I think I think a lot of us think this way, right? We probably I voted the moment I turned 18, I voted. But that was because my parents were not able to vote. And I knew that I was really passionate about that. However, when you have your neighbors and your friends and your siblings who are not paying attention, who don't get it, right? It gets really hard. And I think encouraging young people to vote really means paying attention to their future. I think a lot of us, if we were old enough to vote during the recession, I think we would have voted. Voting would have been very different because we knew that this was going to hit us very hard. And we talk about voting when it comes to so many other things. We're going to talk about voting when it comes to student loans, when it comes to mortgages, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to minimum wage, right? We're voting all of the time. And so I think it's really just really encouraging them to vote for their future. I truly believe that.
May I add something to that answer?
Yes.
And I totally agree with Rep. Alzate. I would just add, in Central Falls, Councilwoman Jessica Vega started a participatory budgeting class in high school. And I thought that was like one of the best ideas because it literally showed the students the process of voting. So they got to do research on the budget. They got to hear from different leaders, who had a say on the budget, the mayor, the superintendent, etc. And then they were able to vote. Well, create committees, right? Create committees for their solutions. And then they needed to create campaigns about it, which is what we're doing. And then they were able to vote on what the issue, whatever that issue was, but they were able to vote on how to spend money. They were able to vote on which issues should go on there. And so I think that built a little bit of trust, not, having it come from a city council person and then actually going through the process yourself and seeing it through. So you see, you have $10,000. These are your needs. Like, these are the options. And then they voted. And now they're going to see it through. They're going to see the changes that are going to happen with that money. And so establishing things like that is what's going to encourage people to vote because they can see that their voice actually matters in something. So just a little side note.
Thank you, Tatiana. We're going to go with another question from the audience by Nicholas Olmo. What organizations would you recommend for education, training, and support for those considering getting into local and state politics? Dylan, we'll start with you.
I think Millennial RI was a huge important thing for me. And there are in every single city and town, though, and in larger cities like Providence, each ward, a city committee. So if you're a Democrat, there's a Democratic city committee, or if you're a Republican, I assume there's a Republican city committee. Don't know, never been to one. But those organizations are generally the people that do a lot of the campaign support work for candidates in the area. And, they're not, you have to kind of find them. You got to search them out, and then you can get involved. And then the second you're there, they're going to have you doing all of the dirty work, which is actually what you want to do. You want to learn how to build out the voter list. You want to learn how to deliver signs. You want to learn how to get people to the polls. All that stuff, that's hard work. That's the stuff that wins and loses elections. And real quick note on, what I would say to young people to get out and vote. I know everyone really likes to talk about the greatness of civic engagement. I would say recognize the fact that you should have a chip on your shoulder because they do not have your interests at heart if you do not vote. So put that chip on your shoulder and take it into the voting booth.
Thank you. And Tatiana, you have something to add?
Yeah, so for me, I think I mentioned them earlier, but just want to highlight New Leaders Council was definitely a great organization to learn about running for office, fundraising, policies, and then Latina Leadership Institute definitely like just dove in a little bit deeper and solidified what that I wanted to run for office. So I would recommend New Leaders Council definitely. I would also recommend Millennial Awry. But I didn't become part of that until later on. And Latina Leadership Institute, if you're a Latina woman wanting to run for office.
We're gonna have one last question, and we'll move on to closing out the program. So again, it's really important election, and I'd love to hear sort of what do you think are the critical issues our generation is facing right now, or what is the most important issue? I'm sorry, too, that our generation should be focused on with so many critical issues that we're facing. And Representative Alzate, I'll start with you.
Where do I begin? One of the things that I keep mentioning, and I know Millennial Awry talks a lot about this. I've had tons of conversations. Student loan debt. That is huge. You know, especially now this pandemic, I think a lot of us saw, the fact that, you have Ivy League schools who are still going to be charging ridiculous amounts of money to take online courses, right? That doesn't make it any better or worse, but, they're still charging lots of money. We're starting to see, I think that our student loan debt really shows it really shows the wealth gap that we have here in this country. The middle class is disappearing, never mind, lower class. And then we just have all of this debt. And what we can see is that, the upper class, they're able to afford school. And that's not fair. As somebody who's starting off in her career, it's been very hard to be able to find a job that allows me the same luxuries that maybe my generation before me was able to have, right? Finding a home, trying to establish myself. We all think about having kids, and we just can't afford it. And not to say, having kids is like a money sign, but to me, it is, having a kid to me with the kind of debt that I have is really scary. I grew up with two immigrant parents, and I saw them struggle, and they did the best that they could. And I love them and appreciate them because they showed me exactly what hard work was, but they also showed me how hard it was with not having an education. And so, I mean, I strive for more as much as I can. I just finished the master's program, but as awesome as being congratulated for that is, I have more debt. And that's really scary when, I want to apply for a credit card, or if, I really want to buy a home. And so I think that our generation really, really needs to tackle student loan debt for real.
I agree, and I know we only have a few minutes left here, but we want to get with this really important question to our two other panelists. So we'll start with you, Tatiana, if you can kind of answer it within a minute or so as well, and then we'll pass it off to Dylan.
Sure. So Karen, you took mine, but whatever. So I would say debt in general too is like one of the biggest challenges for us as millennials. A lot of external factors have dealt us greater wealth disparities than other generations. Pair that with the student debt, rising student debt, and the housing prices. So we don't have a great hand dealt to us, right? And then on top of that, we're perceived as lazy. Although millennials have had to get really creative and actually, a lot of the times come up with side hustles in order to maintain themselves. So we are seeing a greater difference in wealth between millennials, for example, that have college degrees and millennials that don't have college degrees than before. Like it's a bigger gap now than it ever was. And so we can try to go to college and get a degree and earn maybe $50K a year, maybe, with a bunch of debt. Or we can not go to college and earn maybe $25K a year with no debt, which 25K is not really a livable wage. And so, you know, there's something to be said about that. And then to Karen's point about having kids, we are marrying later in life, you know, due to all of these challenges that we're having. But then also we don't have like the luxury, if you will, of like combining salaries with our partners, because we usually aren't looking to marry until later on in life. And then add the cost of living. So there's that as well.
I know. I feel like at this point, the millennial generation, it's tough to call our generation lazy when we've endured 2 economic crises within 15 years since, you know, graduating or so forth. So I definitely think we're changing that stigma for sure. But what's one of the top issues for our generation, Dylan? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, economic equity is really what it is. You know, America declares that we're all created equal and that we all have equal opportunity and we can all pursue happiness. But at the day we're born, you can use our zip code, our gender, our race, our sexuality to try to determine what our health and wealth outcomes are going to be. And that's a perfect indicator that we're not truly free. We don't have equal opportunity in this country. We do not have economic equity in this country. There are declarations of what we believe in, but we've never implemented them. And I think 2020 is a special moment to get that implementation done.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists, for being with us today. I'll leave off some room for final thoughts. Anyone that's watching this, what are some final thoughts that you have for the people either watching this right now or people that will watch this later? Karen, Representative Azate, we'll start with you.
Speechless is the final thoughts.
Dylan.
Sorry.
Representative.
Technical difficulties, but basically, Representative Alzate, if you have any final thoughts.
Final thoughts. My final thoughts are: get out there, help all of the amazing people that are running, incumbents who are running that you love. Get involved.
Thank you. Dylan?
Yeah, I think we need to recognize the 2020 election as a special moment in time. I think we pointed out that for the millennial generation, this is our second economic crisis since the start of our careers. We've essentially we're a lost generation in terms of wealth building, and there's no way around it. It's already over for us, and I'm 33. We need to actually just fix this so this doesn't happen again and again and again. The way it's set up right now is the investor class gets everything they want, and we fight for scraps. And I'm done, and you need to be done too.
Thank you. Tatiana.
One final thought is, if you're thinking of running for office or getting involved in a campaign in any way, do it. It is not unattainable, right? It seems like it's such out of like a far reach or whatever, but it's really not. Most elected officials are just regular people. You know, and that's something I learned, and I should have said this, but I learned that in Congressman Cicilline's office. Like, yes, he's a member of Congress, but he also is a regular human being. And so we need to remember that too when we're thinking about people, right? Like the president or like people who hold these offices, they're just regular people. And so hold them accountable. So make sure, I guess that's my message, hold people accountable. Accountability is really up to us. And so, you know, if you want change, you need to hold people accountable.
Thank you, Tatiana, and thank you for everyone that watch us either on Facebook or Twitter, or will click on a future link to watch this program. For more information about Millennial Rhode Island, you can go on www.millennialrhodeisland.com. You can also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for more information about future events, future programming. I want to thank Ben Barber, who behind the scenes helped produce this, and Chris Parisi and Trailblaze PVD for always being such a great partner for Millennial Rhode Island and also small businesses in our community, and just for people looking to go out there and get the good word about their products and organizations. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you.